But
So, so
like,
during the first Jewish revolt, some of the rebels escaped to the Rock of Masada, which was said to be built by King Herod. I'm not sure how true that is, but anyway, the Roman formed a siege around Masada, and according to Josephus, the Jewish historians, uh, the defenders of Masada committed suicide rather than submit to the Romans. Now, you co-directed the excavation of the Roman siege works at Masada. Were your findings in line with the story that Josephus told, or did you find something different?
right. So, thank you, by the way. That's exactly right. And Herod the Great did originally build the fortress on top of Masada. One of the Hasmoneans reportedly was the first to fortify the top of the mountain, but um, apparently, when Herod built his buildings on top, he obliterated everything that was already there. So what we found actually is very consistent with Josephus's description. But here, thank you for showing the photo, by the way. But here you have to distinguish between Josephus's description of the siege and there's our siege camp. That's right. That's Camp F. Uh, you have to distinguish between Josephus's description of the siege and his description of the actual fall of the mountain. The siege, of course, is the process by which the Romans take the mountain, which means they encircle the mountain with a wall, what's called a circumvallation wall, to make sure nobody can escape and nobody can get in to help. They build a series of camps surrounding the base of the mountain to house their troops, and then they build an assault ramp going up the western side of the mountain so that they can get their siege machinery, basically a battering ram, into place to batter through the fortification wall at the top. And Josephus describes all of that, and it is remarkably consistent with what we see in the archaeological record. Where the debates the debates concern the fall of the mountain, right? So what happens at the end of the siege? How did the mountain fall to the Romans? And here is where Josephus describes, as you said, this kind of mass suicide of all of the Jews on top of the mountain. And do we have archaeological evidence that such an event occurred? And the answer is no, that we do not. But the reason is because this is, again, one of those questions that archaeology is not equipped to answer. And
What
so,
would you have expected to find?
well,
Something that would corroborate Josephus' version. What would you have expected to see?
well, what I think people expect to find is our physical remains of lots of skeletons, right, of the people who committed suicide. Because according to Josephus, there were 967 Jews, men, women, and children, on top of the mountain at the time of the siege. So you would expect to find, I mean, what people who want, to see archaeological evidence, I think, expect to see actual remains of, skeletons, right? Skeletal remains associated with the fall of the mountain. We don't have that. We do have a very, very small number of skeletons, and not all of them can be definitely associated with Jewish rebels, because there were other periods of occupation at Masada. And so, when Yiga El Yadin, who was the famous Israeli archaeologist who excavated the top of Masada in the 1960s, when he excavated and did not find remains of, lots and lots of skeletons, but he thought Josephus's account was accurate. What he suggested was that when the Romans came up to the top of the mountain and then they left a garrison up there for a couple of decades, that the Romans then cleaned up all of the, the rotting corpses and either burned them or buried them in a pit somewhere. And so, we don't have their remains. But let's assume the opposite. Let's assume that there is no mass suicide. Let's assume that the Romans come up and some of the Jews are killed and others are led away into slavery. Maybe some of them even did commit suicide. Who knows? But anyway, there's no mass suicide, let's assume. Well, the same thing would have happened. The Romans would have cleared out any of the corpses that were lying around and disposed of them. So I don't really know that there is anything that you can. So this is, again, why I say this is one of these questions that archaeology is not equipped to answer. And it's really what I like to, explain to people is it really comes down to a matter of how you interpret and evaluate Josephus as an historian, right? Is he reliable? Is he not reliable? Did he invent stuff? Did he not invent stuff? Did he embellish? It comes down to that, right? So I'm an archaeologist. I'm not a Josephus specialist. So I can tell you what the limitations of the archaeology are, but Josephus specialists disagree on how reliable Josephus's testimony is.